You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com.
That'll be script reads me.
Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest
responsibility
is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories that aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 And we trade actors, motherfucker.
Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to the new. I'm your host, Randy Perm. Happy Motivated Monday, and happy belated 4th to those in America. Happy Traders Day, whatever you want to call it. But happy Independence Day. Man, there was a lot going on this weekend, like craziness. But we got through it. But on note, I want to extend a shout out to Dave Milner. He's part of the English Defense League radio show. We took part in a panel discussion yesterday. Kim McClinton, Bob Record, and myself, and a couple of other panelists. But it was mostly all of us from TECN. But we took part of a panel discussion to talk about the 4th of July and as to what it means to us now compared to what it meant years prior, and also if we should, whether or not we should continue to celebrate the 4th of July, given things that are going on in society today. And so it was a very lively discussion. I had a phenomenal time on the show, and you can find it on Blog Talk Radio. You can go to my Facebook page and my Congressional Campaign page, and links are there as well. Of course, you could probably Google it, English Defense League. The show title is Go Forth, and yeah, it was a great show. And this weekend also, on social media, I had a colleague, an acquaintance, I guess you could say, sent me a random message inbox saying to me that my military experience and my political experience, life, whatever, does not speak to the black community. I was like, But it was so left field. The conversation went on like the entire day. We were just going back and forth because I was just trying to really reconcile where this came from. And it boiled down to that because I have unique experiences, not even unique, they're not even unique experiences. I guess, showcase my experiences in life, that it's not relatable to people who are not of those domains. And I had to explain to them, I said, you gotta realize, I operate in the military domain, media, education, political, and business world. So if we isolated each one of those domains, and I can find success in each one of those pillars, then what is the problem? And he alludes to, he goes into talking about, white people suppressing and oppressing and everything else. And I'm like, 9 times out of 10, I'm like the only black guy in the room, if not the building. And here's a stark example. Boom. This here is a photo of a meeting that we took a while back. Do you see me? Right center, yeah, pretty much dead center, top row, second to last, there. Only black guy in the room, in the building. And so, today we're going to discuss systemic racism. And I thought bringing up this conversation will build a segue into today's topic, because we have to understand that systemic racism, yes, it existed. Can we say that it exists today? Not so much so. And I would even argue that systemic racism is not racism. I would more appropriately give it the title of systemic prejudice. And with that, when you look at, given whatever system that you want to say is systemically racist, if people of color are finding success within that system, then they can't make the argument that they're being racist towards them, because they're finding success in it. And we're gonna get more into it. Today's gonna be a deep dive into systemic racism. But first and foremost, I want to share with you all, given that this is the 4th of July weekend, and I'll take this hat off, it's kind of warm. The 4th of July weekend and all. What to the slave is the 4th of July? Speech by Frederick Douglass. And when I get done playing this speech, I'm going to have some caveats. Take a look.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today in this special broadcast, we begin with the words of Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery around 1818, Douglass became a key leader of the abolitionist movement. On July 5th, 1852, in Rochester, New York, he gave one of his most famous speeches, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. He was addressing the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. This is the actor James Earl Jones reading the historic address during a performance of Howard Zinn's Voices of a People's History of the United States. This is the late, great people's historian, Howard Zinn.
Frederick Douglass, once a slave, became a brilliant and powerful leader of the anti-slavery movement. In 1852, he was asked to speak in celebration of the 4th of July.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us, I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour forth a stream, a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and the crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
That was James Earl Jones reading the words of Frederick Douglass.
So, of course, you heard the speech. Now, what people also, I guess you could say, cherry pick in history is that although Frederick Douglass gave a lambasting to the 4th of July because he was called upon to make some remarks in hopes that, I guess people thought that, he was going to be celebrating with them. And he's like, "See my," but well, what people leave out is that Frederick Douglass had two different revisions, if you will, about the 4th of July later on. He comes back in 1862, and I quote in part that we are only continuing the tremendous struggle which our fathers, which your fathers and my fathers began 86 years ago. And later on, this was in 1862, and he comes back in 1875, and he addresses another group of people. This is mostly African Americans after the after the freeing of slaves and everything in 1865. He says, if war among the whites brought peace and liberty to the blacks, what would peace among the whites bring? He asked. Hence, you see him addressing them directly with a double message, demanding that the nation enforce Reconstruction, but also appealing for self-reliance. And so it speaks volumes that we like I said, we cherry pick history, and we'll pick a narrative, or we'll pick a story, we'll pick a speech, we'll pick something to placate what we're feeling at that time, and say, you know, well, Frederick Douglass didn't celebrate the 4th of July. Oh no, yeah, he did later on. At that time in 1852, 169 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, he felt some kind of way because he was, you know, newly freed in a sense. You know, he just escaped slavery and all that good stuff. And so he's on the speaking circuit, railing against, you know, being an abolitionist that he was, railing against, you know, people still being in bondage, while you got other people, whites, out celebrating the nation's independence. He's like, hello, we got people still, you know, still in slavery, and you talking about something, come and celebrate this with you? Why? You know, so he makes a poignant argument there. But like I said, later on, as you know, time progressed, and as social norms progressed, and slaves became free and everything else, he had a changing view about the 4th of July and about the nation and the celebrating the nation's independence. So just wanted to point that out to you all. And we're going to jump to a quick commercial break. Keep it locked right here. We'll be right back. And when we come back, we're going to jump into the deep dive of this systemic racism. So stay tuned.
You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com. You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com.
All right, so welcome back. Now, what is systemic racism, you may ask? Well, it seems to be more so pointing to the idea. My screen will quit jumping around here. It seems to be pointing to the idea that every living domain in our society, whether that's education, banking, housing, you name it, has embedded racist ideas, racist rules, racist laws, our justice system, and that they're all designed to keep or suppress blacks specifically, because the conversation is always geared around the black community when it comes to systemic racism. I cannot recall, nor have I ever heard that systemic racism was being employed against other minorities. I can't say that I heard that or seen that, but nonetheless, here is a little cartoon to explain systemic racism, and I will come back and we're gonna tear this apart.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
All right, so you saw some inherent fallacies with the explanation and the examples that was utilized. Like, there was a movie that was made recently, a documentary on Madam C.J. Walker. It was called, I believe the title was Self-Made. And we all know that Madam C.J. Walker was the first black recorded millionaire although there's some arguments about that, that somebody else that was an oil queen out of Louisiana was a millionaire. Removing all that. See, this when you know history, you get stuff jumbled up. And anyways, anyway, Madam C.J. Walker was the first recorded, air quotes there, first recorded black female millionaire. She accumulated so much wealth from her hair product line that she actually acquired property living next door to, I want to say it was Rockefeller. It was either Rockefeller or Henry Ford, one of the two. And they ended up becoming great friends down the line. But, she could not really pass along her wealth and everything because her daughter, she only had one child at the time, her daughter was a lesbian and all that good stuff and was kind of like irresponsible in life and everything because she was trying to teach her the business and she wasn't really listening and all that good stuff. So it kind of just fell flat from there. So when you say that the system is, that there's systemic racism in red line and housing and banking opportunities and whatnot, she had to navigate those systems in order to find success in it. So was it racist towards her? And then we like to use the argument that, okay, if you find success in these systems, then you are an anomaly. Well, hell, there's a lot of damn anomalies out there then because there's a lot of successful black people. Now, it goes further. It goes further when it talks about the education and the yielding after graduation of whether or not they get a job attainment. Well, that's not relegated to just black people. I've seen people of all races, all backgrounds, generally have issues of attaining employment because they don't have any experience. You may have the education in the field, but you don't have any work experience. And most jobs require that you have a work experience. So once again, it goes back to, you might get lucky and get hired. But once again, it goes back to showing that, no, that's probably more of an implied prejudice. Like he said, there's some implied biases, and I'm going to touch on that in a second. There's probably some prejudice there against individuals who are applying for a job. They're like, great resume, a lot of fluff there, because I've seen it and I've done it, and I've looked at resumes and I told people to take stuff out because it sounded like BS. But nonetheless, you got all these great accolades, but where's the work experience? And a lot of employers will tell you that. Like, it's great to have, a dazzling on paper, but where's the actual experience? So, anyways, now moving on to the implicit bias piece. I don't disagree there. I don't. However, there are some things that they fail to mention in that these implicit biases, this is the whole apparatus of systemic racism kind of falls flat on the surface because you don't see this conversation happening at the international level. You don't hear of systemic racism in China. You don't hear about systemic racism in Germany. You don't hear about systemic racism in UK. You don't hear about systemic racism in Canada, Mexico, Guatemala. You don't. Why? It's not because the population is like immensely just all of whatever ethnicity it is. No, these are mixed populations all across. Even in Nigeria, the Congo, Liberia, Libya, there's mixed populations all across the world. But you don't hear about, talk systemic racism and how the man is keeping, minorities down, or specifically black people down in these other places. Why? Because the very apparatus, the ideological apparatus behind it falls flat when you look at the application of it. If people are generating success out of these domains, then where is the racism? Once again, prejudice, sure. There will be selectiveness on, one black person coming through the door that don't have a job but wants to apply for a bank loan to get a business started versus a black person that has a job, has some collateral to put down and applies for a bank loan and gets it. See, there's a difference there. So there's a prejudice, but it's not a racist thing. So so we have to look at also when we talk about systemic racism, the the transformation that society has gone through over time to where we are today, can one really point out that there is something that is systemically racist that's going on today? No, you can't. Redlining. Well, let's jump to redlining for a second. You saw how it talked about redlining, how it's still going on in 2017, I believe we said, in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, Chicago has been an all predominantly black city for decades. For decades. If you look at Chicago political structure and economic structure even, you will see that it is predominantly black ran. So who is it that is partaking in redlining practices? Black people. This has been known for a long time, that there are wealthy blacks or well-to-do blacks. They take part in redlining certain communities to keep the riffraff of the blacks and other minority groups out of these certain areas. So, once again, is it racism? No, it's a prejudice. Now, you can't make this stuff up. So, can you really call these systems? And we look at the crime, incarceration. I will acknowledge that sentencing tends to be a little more harsher with minorities than they are with whites. Why is that? Well, I would say a contributing factor is when you just look at the construct of society right now, you do have blacks that are committing more crime than other ethnic groups at a higher rate. So I guess the deterrent would be to give them harsher sentences. Maybe that will deter them from doing it, but that's not even working because people are still doing it. So what would be the next step? Oh, we're just going to lock you up for life. Then people will be crying saying, oh, this is, racist against just black people because we keep committing the same crimes and we just get longer and longer sentences. I'm going to touch on that conversation in a minute. But not to jump around too much, because this is to break this all down. It goes back to a couple of things. One, you can't call a system racist when there are people within that system succeeding. Just like AOC, Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez, representative type out of New York, she's making a call for the marijuana ban or the marijuana suspension of Sha'Carri Richardson is racist because black people smoke marijuana. Can't make this stuff up. If there's a ban on something and it results in a suspension, and although it applied to white people because Michael Phelps was suspended for 3 months, and he's a white man, and she gets only a 1 month suspension, I would think there's some reverse racism going on there. But hey, that's another conversation. But to say that because black people smoke marijuana, it's racist to put a law or put a rule in place that will get them in trouble if they're caught. If the law applies to everyone else across the board, and how is it just because they do it in they have the higher propensity to engage in it, that it's racist? That makes absolutely no sense. It's the same with these voter laws that's going on right now. You can't say that it's targeting just black people if the law is applying to everybody, just because there is a predominant group of black people in a given area. If they all have IDs or if they all are voting in the right districts and everything else, what is the problem? That's not systemic racism. But I digress. But folks, we're talking about here systemic racism in terms of systems or institutions that we live in, right? Let's pause that conversation for a second and bring in something else that's going on. The intellect of ethnicities. Let me back up. If there is a disparity if there's a disparity in against blacks specifically, then why is it that you have a disparity against blacks specifically? The argument is this: you have disparities against blacks specifically in terms of, you know, everything being a systemically racist against just black people, right? Why do we have? Oop, wrong chart. I'm getting there. Told you I got a lot of stuff going on here. Why do we have the median household income as of 2019 that Asians are like whooping ass on income? And then you have whites, Caucasians, coming in just shy around 20,000 less, and then blacks coming in, Hispanics, excuse me, coming in a little bit less than them at 20,000 less than them, and then blacks are coming in at 9,000 less than Hispanics. Now, conversely, we look at immigration. We look at immigration charts. How is it that you have Africans, if you go all the way over to sub-Saharan Africa, they're making 52,000 generally, and Asians are making 78,000, but for some reason black people are being targeted, or there's systemic racism going on with Africans, immigrated Africans making $10,000 on average more than African Americans in America. Why is that? How is that even possible? Now, I go out in my community here in the general vicinity of the city, and I see tons, like literally in one strip mall, I see like at least 2 African braiding businesses. Kid you not. And I see, you know, Caribbean jerk restaurants. I see, you know, there's so many different ethnocentric businesses here. And I go in and I talk to some of these people, you know, when I'm ordering the food and stuff, of course. And I kind of like have that little sidebar conversation, like, where are you from? Where are you coming from? What's your story? This, that, and the third. Because I'm curious to know as to how is it possible that if we have a systemically racist system, why is it that immigrants are coming in of the same category are not being systemically being racist or being discriminated against? That's the word I was looking for. Being discriminated against. If that is the case, how come they're finding success greater than those who are already in America? Well, that conversation leads into the idea that the intelligence, the intellectual faculties of blacks are lower than that of all other ethnic groups. This is why they're constantly ranking last when you're drawing comparisons to other ethnic groups. Now, this is going to be controversial, y'all. Y'all going to probably say, Randy, get the out of here with this mess. I am not the one that's doing it. I'm just presenting what's being discussed in the academic world, and the conversation has some credence to it, because I have seen studies myself that would suggest the same thing, and we also have to tie that into our actions, what's going on, and you know, the outcomes of situations. That's why there's such this big push. And I'm gonna get into that here in a minute. This is why we have to mesh those two conversations together. We talk about something being systemically racist, but also we're not looking at our social intellect that's playing a factor into some of these things. You're probably saying, what the hell are you talking about? We'll be right back.
You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com. You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com.
All right, welcome back. So our last piece here is discussing the intellectual capacity of various ethnic groups and how black people tend to ring in last in these categories in the field of intelligence, generally intelligence as a collective, not individually. And you'll see what I'm talking about here in upcoming. Now, before I jump into this conversation here takes place between Coleman Hughes and this author named Charles Murray. And Charles Murray just came out with a book called Face the Reality. And you may take what he says to be like just absolute white supremacists, racists, Klan, KKK all day, you know, at the White House back in 1914 with the filming of the Birth of a Nation, like he's the leader of this group. You may take what he is saying as that, and you start to block him out. But I want you to intently listen to what he is saying so it can feed into this conversation that we're about to have. So take a look. If I can find it. There we go.
You say in the beginning of the book that in a reasonable world, like, you know, just saying these facts that you sort of talked about in the first 30 minutes or so wouldn't be controversial. I was like, yes, but we don't live in a reasonable world. And if we lived in a reasonable world, we wouldn't have to have a military. We wouldn't have to have all kinds of things. And we would, in fact, probably have a whole different set of moral obligations to people if we lived in a perfectly reasonable world. And I really fear that this stuff becoming mainstreamed is absolutely the wrong reaction to the valid grievances that you were talking about. And I want to say one more thing here. We're living right now in an increasing era of racial preferences for minorities, right? I've talked about this. The mayor of Oakland recently decided to only give checks to poor black people and not poor white people in the city. I think that is every bit as much an insult to my sense of what it is to be an American as I assume it is to yours, Charles. What I have to say is that there's more to this living by the American creed of treating people as individuals than just having a legal regime of colorblindness. As important, perhaps more important, is that we promote social and psychological colorblindness, that we don't add flames to the fire of tribalism. And I really worry that this is a unintended consequence of talking about race and IQ. And there are some reasons I think that. I mean, I saw a general social survey result that really, really dismayed me. And you're right to talk about Oprah Winfrey and Barack Obama. I think those achievements represent huge progress that is unpopular to acknowledge. However, at the same time, I read this from the General Social Survey, which is, I think, a very trusted polling organization. This is from 2016, so slightly out of date, but probably still pretty close. This says 26%, 1 in 4, of white Republicans and 18%, almost 1 in 5, of white Democrats rated blacks as less intelligent than whites 5 years ago. It's the same percentage of white Republicans, 26, and a slightly lower percent, 12% of white Democrats said they object to a relative marrying a black person. Now, those numbers are, higher than I would have predicted if you had asked me the moment before I read that. The notion that 1 in 4 white Republicans and something like 1 in 9 white Democrats would object to a black person marrying, their daughter. What bothers me the most about that is that those numbers are the same. I mean, or the same for Republicans and close to the same for Democrats, which means in practice, on the ground, people who are far less educated than you are, far less nuanced on these issues, haven't been carefully carving conceptual distinctions because they're just average people. They really do link the two things. They link the belief that black people are on average less intelligent to the belief that to the truly racist beliefs that I don't want my relatives marrying a black person. And this is, to me, something you really have to grapple with. The particular kind of tribal unreason in this world might be a kind of fire that you're unintentionally lighting a match on.
I think that the country is in flames already. I think we are headed toward the end of the American project in any meaningful form. That when people talk about the 1850s all over again, a concept I laughed at a few years ago, it is no longer laughable. It's still not probable, but it's not laughable. And the thing that people like you, Coleman, have to come to grips with is, okay, so I want to make the argument that America is not systemically racist. I want to make the argument that actually America has done a pretty damn good job of, given the difficulties that multiracial societies have around the world, damn good job of dealing with this. And we're about to throw all that away because it's partly Latinos, but it's mainly blacks. have decided that identity politics as time has come. And so we are looking at not 50 years from now, but we are looking over the next couple of election cycles at the possibility of kind of irreparable abandonment of the ideal of the American creed, where you treat people as individuals regardless of race, color, and creed, and so forth. So I think that we are in a crisis, and the question I ask of you, okay, Coleman, how do I demonstrate that this is not a systemically racist country? How do I explain that you have so many fewer Black physicians than the percentage of the population would warrant, and Black engineers? So what I'm trying to say is I have this problem, Coleman, of defending the proposition that this is not a systemically racist country unless I am willing to talk about these two realities involving crime and involving employment and education. Because otherwise, the statement is, what else can it be? That's been going on all this time. It's been going on for all these decades. We have not been making much progress by all sorts of measures in the last 20, 30 years. It has to be racism. Do you have an alternative to saying, damn it, yes, the police are going to behave differently in a community where the violent crime rate is way higher than it is in the neighborhood across town? Yes, people will have difficulty getting trained as physicians or as nuclear physicists or so forth in the same proportions as another group if you have differences in cognitive ability. Absent those kinds of coming to grips with that reality, the charge of systemic racism is going to persist. Now, I can't emphasize this too strongly. It has to be conjoined with the moral obligation to judge people as individuals. And here is, we both have an ample number of things that we can say to each other about this is real and this is harmful. The reality of aggressive affirmative action, which nobody wants to say is, but everybody kind of knows. Whites widely consider that anytime there is a new Black face in the office, that's an affirmative action hire. That's the default assumption. And once they prove that they are really good at their job, nobody is more ecstatic at finding that out than white colleagues are. Whites don't like the idea of their just instinctive reaction is this person's an affirmative action hire. But that's there because the policy reality out there is that means a lot of people are in their positions only because of the color of their skin. That's poisonous. That's poisonous at a level. Well, here's the contrast I draw in the book. The white elites look around at their situations and they say, hey, my Black colleagues at work are really very good, and they're just as smart as the whites are, and my Black neighbors are as helpful and cooperative and good company and honest as anybody else. Okay, that's the reality of their situation, because guess what? Elite neighborhoods, first place, have very small minority populations. And secondly, the members of the minorities who are in those neighborhoods are there because they can afford to be there. And if they can afford to be there, they're part of the same culture. What about the Black cop in Queens who's raising his family in a mixed race neighborhood in Queens, where the reality of his experience is that most of the kids at the bottom of the class in his child's school are Black, and the reality is that most of the crime around his home is Black, and so forth and so on. That's the reality of his life. He's the person who has to understand you do not have the option of judging people as groups. You have to confront each individual as you find them, because unless you do that, you are genuinely being racist. So I am saying we've got to talk about these realities. We've also got to passionately affirm the American ideal of treating people as individuals, which we are in danger of losing forever. So in a way, I have no good answer to the downsides of what I'm trying to do. There are a number of people whom I respect that have already said this very strongly to me, including members of my own family. And I finally decided I had to write this book because I think we've got catastrophe coming at us down the road where this country just ceases to be America. And if I'm wrong about that, and we would have pulled out of this anyway, then I'm really sorry for the damage I may have caused. But insofar as I think that unless we come to grips with the twin imperatives of treating the world as it is and also treating people as individuals, I don't know how to end that sentence. We're going to go down the tubes. So I guess the fair statement is I have decided that it's one of those situations where you have to do whatever seems to give you the best chance of rallying some kind of reaction to the current dominant public intellectual dialogue, which is sympathetic to critical race theory and systemic racism.
All right, folks. So there you have it. That was in a nutshell that what we're talking about today, and how we have to come to grips and come to the understanding that maybe perhaps there is some credibility there, that we find CRT, critical race theory, and systemic racism being the forefront of the conversation, because we don't really want to address the fact that, oh, maybe black people are just collectively dumb. So we have to find an excuse for them, and these are the mechanisms we're going to use, as he suggested, as he actually said it. And then also we have to look at the causations of these different things that paved the way for systemic racism and critical race theory to be brought into the picture. And he makes a succinct point that we need to just, instead of doing that, we need to look at people at an individual basis and treat them accordingly, because if you try to do this collectively, it's going to appear to be racist. And that's why I showed these examples. And there was an article that kind of supports his theory. The University of Virginia drew a record of 48,000 applications for the next class in Charlottesville, about 15% more than the year before. Freshman applicants to the University of California at Berkeley crossed into six figures for the first time, totaling more than 112,000, up 28%. Harvard University's totals spiked to an all-time high of 57,000. That was up 42%. The sudden explosion in demand for these and other big-name schools is another ripple effect of the coronavirus pandemic, BS, and that could reshape college admissions for many years to come. The pandemic has given huge and in some places decisive momentum to a movement to reduce or eliminate the use of admission tests, ding, 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 at highly competitive colleges and universities. That in turn has lured more applicants to the upper tier of the market. And, quote, we're accumulating great information about how students respond and how to conduct whole person reviews with either far fewer or no SAT/ACT scores, Burdick wrote in an email. We expect to put this new knowledge to use as we consider how to continue reducing admission barriers while maintaining highly selective standards over the next couple of years. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm out of time, when you're removing testing standards and saying, okay, we're going to take the test away so that more minorities, especially more considerably, and it talks about it in the larger article, I just took some excerpts from it, that way blacks can apply to these schools as well, and we can get them in there, and hopefully they succeed. Antonin Scalia, justice type, he talked about this years ago, that, you know, doing this, you're setting people up for failure, that you're expecting them to be able to perform in a domain that they're not mentally equipped to handle, because you're trying to reduce standards to get them through. Folks, that is all the time I have. You can find me on Twitter, rperm, at rperm. You can find me on MeWe, Gab, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that good stuff under my name. You can support my campaign at rpermforus.com, right above my head there. And appreciate you, and we will see you all on Friday. And God bless.
You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com.